Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. I have an esteemed expert with us today, Benjamin Surmi. Hi, Benjamin. How are you?
Pretty good. Good to be with you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to our audience today. And before we get started, can you just tell them a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, how you enjoy spending your time?
Sure. Yes, I live in Vancouver, Washington. However, I grew up in Southern California, so I'm still a sunshine boy and struggle with all the rain up here. But I've got four little kids who think that rain is normal, and I feel like I did them a disservice. So yeah, I hang out with them. That's what I do most of the time is just getting to spend time with them. Thanks for asking.
And I don't know much about Washington geography. Where is Vancouver, Washington?
Right next to Portland, Oregon. Like
Oh, okay. So it's on the southern end of Washington. Okay. We spent a spring break one year in Leavenworth, Washington, and that was my kids' favorite trip. Oh, like so different than what we normally do. And I'm hoping we can go back. It's just kind of hard to get to because you have to fly into an airport, usually drive a couple hours. So, but like professionally, so I read that you're a social gerontologist. Can you tell me what that is?
Well, so I'm not an MD. A lot of people I would just say gerontologist, but most people don't realize like a geriatrician is typically a doctor, and that's who sometimes they think I am. But I'm a social gerontologist. So I've studied aging from more a broad perspective. So everything from medical to political to demographic to financial, right? Like all the different aspects of aging is kind of my interest, right? The holistic view of how do we age in this particular society? How do we help people thrive as they age? How do we deal with organizations and institutions that serve elders? How do we adjust those organizations, institutions so that they serve them better?
So, what does that academic trail look like from like college? Is a degree path starting as a bachelor's, or like how do you get to do
There's
something like that?
some colleges, I believe, that have a gerontologist major. There are very few, though. So mine was a master's degree, and then there's people who get their PhD in gerontology as well. So it's fairly new. I mean, I think the first were in like the 1980s or something like that. It's a fairly new field because of the huge boom of elders across civilizations, and so there became a need to study this and look at it.
Well, we're very gerontologist friendly. I actually had one on maybe last year or the year before. She was an environmental gerontologist,
Okay.
which was
Yeah.
aimed specifically at environments for promoting aging. And honestly, I'm glad you're not a geriatrician because geriatricians have to be, just by the way the system works, so incredibly focused on complex medical issues. I love that there's a subset of academics that can sit back and say, well, there's an interplay between those medical issues that we see in a clinic and their social network, their environment, their behaviors, habits, support systems, et cetera. And because clearly nobody just ages in a doctor's office, right? And so
Right.
I hope not. That'd be like the worst place to age, I think, even if I could design the doctor's office. So, how in the world did you get interested in such a unique, specific topic?
Well, I spent a lot of my childhood sitting at the feet of older people and listening to their stories and finding that mysterious mesmerization that you get when you hear stories from people who've lived through history that you'll never get to experience and you only see in the movies, right? And hearing about living in a concentration camp, hearing about being places I'd never been before, hearing about a different era in American life and living through that and living through wars and it's fascinating. So I was blown away, fell in love with just being with older people in general. And then I started volunteering in retirement homes and also got kind of angry. I just got angry because I was watching how many elders just literally are sitting around watching TV, watching Judge Judy, really, and playing bingo. And that's their life. And I was like, I want to be part of helping create spaces and programs for elders so they can live full lives. That was what got me started. But I also really felt like I belonged. I can remember driving home from volunteering one day and just I had to pull over because I had this overwhelming sense come over me of you belong here. This is where you belong. And at the time, I just felt maybe a calling. But as I look back, I also think now that I've studied sociology and other things, I've like, I think I wonder if I was also was experiencing a missing piece of American life. Much of American life today is very individualistic. You go to your house. I mean, I drive into my home and I don't know almost any of my neighbors, right? Like Everybody parks in their garage. Nobody walks out their front door. And so I know almost nobody. And I go to the store. I don't see anybody I've seen before. But you walk into an assisted living where 100 elders live and 50 young people work and 400 family members visit. And it's a micro village like many people grew up in throughout world history. And there's something that we need in this community of people who know each other, can laugh at each other's jokes. Hey, Joe, good to see you. Hey, it's good to see you. You know, your hair's all bad, right? Like that camaraderie of walking into a place where everybody knows your name, like Cheer, right? Like Cheer on
Right.
TV. So that's what got me started.
So what does that look like professionally? So you end up like developing senior living, or what kind of led you after your degree?
Yeah, so I've done caregiving, I've done activity directing, I've helped build programs at the YMCA for seniors and done work with senior centers and all those kinds of things. I've run memory care communities and then over time have just grown into a role where I help shape the engagement programs for seniors at 39 retirement homes across 8 states and shape the work experience of caregivers by building tools for their work, finding trainings for them or building trainings for them, and doing work for a family, such as thinking through what's the experience like when you move into one of our communities? How hard is it on the family? What kind of paperwork do they have to do? What kind of hoops do they have to jump through? How can we make that easier on the family? So a variety of projects now that are designed at increasing quality of life for the elders and increasing ease of caring for an elder, for the families, and then making the workplace better for the employee.
So it sounds like you're almost like a chief experience officer,
Yeah, kinda like that, yeah.
right? Right. I've heard that I had that term in the workplaces I was before. So when you are designing an experience, we'll start first with the residents, or what's the best term? Is it resident or it's not patient, right? For the people that live in these
Being in memory
communities.
care, we still call them residents. I think we
Resident, okay. And so
yeah.
when you're designing either programming or the environment for a resident, what are like your 2 or 3 go-to, like, heuristics or values, or, just what do you draw from? Because I can imagine, I mean, there's some evidence base to it, not nearly enough, right? So if you go and look for, like, medical literature, it's a little scant on exactly what people respond to, but clearly you have a lot of experience and then your education, but what are your go-tos kinda deep down that you draw from to help kinda develop these experiences?
So when I first started, I was definitely more taking what I knew from research and then trying to implement that in these settings. Over time, what I've come to realize is these settings are more like they're like little cities, they're like little churches, and they have their own politics. They have their own way of functioning, right? These are not like a Starbucks where you could maybe just add a new product. These are living, breathing organisms between the leadership of the community, the employees, the families, the residents. It's not easy to just take a product, a tool, a program, a best practice, and somehow insert it and actually have people adopt it and use it. And so, I've tried that many times. We've rolled out fall prevention programs. We've rolled out family communication programs. We've rolled out all kinds of different engagement experiences and service opportunities. And some of them take off and some of them just peter out because they're not born from the people within. So if you think about like how would you make change in, let's say, a faith community of people who've been meeting together for 20 years and they all have their potluck the same way and they all have their, Bible study at the same time of the week, right? And the new pastor comes in and he's like, we're gonna do this new thing I learned in seminary, right? Like, how's that gonna go? It's not gonna go too well. So my focus, number one, has been increasingly as I've aged, has grown increasingly about highlighting the passion of the people in the community and building upon that passion, right? So if you see that in this community, they're really into service projects and you've got some passionate people there, let's lean into that. Let's coach that. Let's support them in that. Let's share what they're doing with everybody else so everybody else gets inspired by that, right? And so number one, my approach now is much more how do we help the latent passions and enthusiasms that are in this particular organism. How do we support that and how do we pull barriers away so they can go as far as they want to go and not be constricted by bureaucracy? And so one simple way is through culture moments where I'm collecting all month examples of different things people are doing and then sharing that to everybody so everybody can see, oh, this community leads these reminiscing sessions every single other week, and it's highly attended. Lots of people are coming, and elders are being vulnerable, and they're building relationships with each other. And this community is busting the boundaries on dementia by having their elders with dementia do self-portraits and do statuettes. And they're not just coloring in a coloring book. Like, look what they can do, right? And so we'll highlight those things so that people can see, and then they go, oh, I can do that too. So that's one thing. Second would be I'm very big on residents being leaders, right? So, and I like to highlight those experiences to our team so they see examples. So, like Women's Month or Women's Day this year, one of our independent living communities had 4 women who researched 4 women from history, dressed up like those women, and then presented as though they were Julia Child, as though they were these different famous people in front of all of their peers. To me, that's like a gold standard of what programming in an assisted living needs to look like. It's not should be a college student who's coming in there and, doing some activity. It needs to be the elders themselves. And so that's a big push for me is encouraging folks, teaching folks, counseling folks, reminding folks, hey, why don't you get a team of elders together to help you plan those bus outings, right? Don't just do it yourself. Like, you get the elders to tell you, where do we want to go together? And then the third is community service, which is for many of our teams, when I started doing this, it was brand new. Like, it's all entertainment. And I said, hey, we've got to empower elders to serve others, because when they come to our setting, they've lived a full life of serving people. That's why they're 100, because they spent their life being generous. And now all we give them is entertainment. No, we need to be supporting them. Even if they have dementia and all they can do is cut coupons, we're going to help them cut coupons to give to victims of domestic violence, right? If all they can do is tie some things together, we're going to create a craft, or they can create dog toys. They can go to the local shelter, right? So that's another big thing, is how do we help elders not just be entertained to death, but engage in service, which is what brought them to this age to begin with. So those are
Awesome.
three. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk just big picture. When I use the term senior living community, that can already instill some confusion in people because we have so many different types. And until you need to engage in them for yourself or for a loved one, I feel like a nursing home sounds the same as an independent living, as an ALF. And then we start using acronyms. So if we could just go way big picture, like 30,000-foot view of when we use the term, or when you use the term senior living community, what are you encompassing within that term? And then what are the breakdowns underneath that?
Yes. Okay. So across the United States, and this is all relatively new, right? Like 1980s, 1979 was the first purpose-built assisted living in the United States. So this is fairly new to the United States. Much of American history has unfortunately been mixing elders into insane asylums. This is what they were called, sanitariums, poorhouses, right? There were some aged homes for the aged, things like that. But it wasn't until the 1960s we built nursing homes. We built, I think, 17,000 nursing homes in 10 years because we wanted to get elders out of the hospital. And so we pulled elders out of the hospital, put them in these mini hospitals called nursing homes. And it wasn't until 1979 that we said, hey, let's create places that are actually like a home, that people can live. They can have their own stuff, their own closet, their own little kitchen, their own, they can have their own apartment, and they can decorate any way they want. And they can wear normal clothes, and right? They can live in an apartment, but we're going to provide care to them. So that's where it started in 1979. And the company I work for actually created America's very first assisted living that was purpose built for that purpose, from what I can see in the history books. So anyway, we started with assisted living in 1979 as a country. And assisted living was basically just an apartment building where you could live, and there would be caregivers who would help you to the bathroom, help you get a shower, someone could give meds to you, etc. Over time, we've also developed a clear distinction between assisted living and independent living. Independent living, these are typically apartments, sometimes they're cottages, but where you go and you can hire caregiving services, but from a separate company. but everything you're purchasing with your rent, activities, bus outings, housekeeping services, maintenance services are offered by the company that you're renting your apartment from, right? So you're a renter, you're not anything else. You are a renter of this apartment, but it comes with some meals, it comes with various amenities so you can have a more gracious lifestyle as you age, right? And have things available to you that will help you probably stay independent longer because you can just, hey, I just need a ride. Hey, can you deliver food to me today? I had a surgery, right? You can make things easier on yourself. And then we developed in the United States memory care, which memory care is really just a subset of either a nursing home or an assisted living, where it's typically the main difference is it's a secured unit. So the person cannot leave without getting extra help or an escort, right? Typically in a memory care, you have more caregivers than you would have in assisted living. So for instance, in assisted living, you might have one caregiver taking care of 30 to 50 people, depending on the company. In a memory care, you might have one caregiver to 6 to 20 elders in a memory care, right? So you're paying for a secured unit and more caregivers available to help the residents. Typically, a memory care is going to have not a kitchenette in the apartment. It's going to be a room and a bathroom. That is what you're renting in a memory care because folks can't take care of a kitchen. They can't take care of a living room and a dining room. They just need a room and they spend the rest of their day out in the community and the common areas with other people because being alone creates a lot of issues for many people living with dementia. Then you have group homes, adult family homes. They're called by different names in different states. Not every state has a lot of them. California and Washington have a lot of them. In my city alone, we have 400 adult family homes. In my county, I think we have 1,200. So these are family homes. They may be one person living there, two people, six people, eight people. Every state has a maximum number of people that can live there. And these are regular family homes. They may be modified. They may be purpose built so that there's, 8 individual rooms with 8 bathrooms or 8 individual rooms with 2 common bathrooms. So some people will construct the home specifically for this purpose. Others, they just buy a home and they say, okay, we're going to live upstairs and we're going to rent space to 4 elders and we're going to hire caregivers and the caregivers are going to take care of them. And so in many states, we have this concept of group home or adult family home where elders can also get care. So those are some of the key areas of senior living. You also have like active adult, which is another category. These are like often the big leisure worlds of the world where you have this, massive amount of single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and you have all these amenities that seniors might like within like a gated community, but you don't get care. You get all kinds of amenities, but you don't get care. So it'd be an active adult community. And then America's starting to see some unique things happening. We're starting to see things like companies that will just take rooms in an apartment complex and they'll add services to those rooms in that apartment complex. So it's a regular apartment complex, but you get help. Or we are also seeing the co-living movement now is you're starting to see people as boomers get together and develop a co-living experience where they're going to help each other. And they're going to build their own place or buy a duplex or a triplex or quadplex. And I'm going to cook. You're going to do this. You're the nurse. We're all going to work together. So you're seeing co-living become a thing. And then you also have kind of house sharing with companies like Nesterly, where their whole thing is we're going to background check both of you. And we're going to match make between an elder and another elder or an elder and a college student. And then you can share a house together safely. So you're starting to see all kinds of different approaches, but the most common are nursing homes, which are like many hospitals, assisted living, memory care, independent living, and then plain old retirement communities, which they're not, there's almost no services. It's like, it's developed to be a smaller unit, and maybe they provide like one meal a week for fun and some bingo. Maybe there's a bus, but other than that, you're kind of on your own. So there's also retirement communities. Does that kind of get at what you're asking?
No, yeah. And there's even on top of that, I'm going to mess up the name, but it's like a continuous community where you can enter at independent living and then progress through. And the way that my friend explained it to me was that her mom paid $250,000 up front in Florida to enter a community where she would do the rest of her life all the way to including hospice and basically death services. So she's like, we're good. We're good. She's in there. I don't know how long she's going to live, but we're taken care of. And so it doesn't even occur to her that she would ever become a caregiver or need to have a space in her home because luckily her mom was of enough means to be able to do something like this. So I'm blanking on the actual name for
So
those.
the old name for those was the Continuum Care Retirement Community, CCRC. That was the old.
Okay.
Recently, the consortium of CCRCs got together and they changed their industry name to Life Plan Communities, because
Oh
I
yeah.
just their name. Most people still call them CCRCs, but the industry officially is Life Plan Communities. And that's you're right. That's a I forgot to mention that only because the three I talked about are on that same campus, right? So
Right.
in some sense, Life Plan Community is more of a financial arrangement between some of the options I mentioned, right? It's like you have an independent
Right.
living, you have assisted living, you have a nursing home on the same property. And so it's more of a financial arrangement where you're buying into that whole campus. It is important to note, though, that we've had some significant bankruptcies in the past few years of CCRCs where the seniors who put their money in are the last to get paid. The creditors all get paid. The elders are the last people to get their money back. And so the challenge, of course, is when you put that much money in to an organization, you have to believe that that organization is going to exist when you need their help most. And of course, the advocates for CCRCs will say that's a very small percentage. That could happen in any business or anything. You could buy a house and your house could get flooded, right? I mean, so I'm not saying anything against that, but it's important you go in knowing I could lose all of this money. Like they could go bankrupt, right? Or there might not be a spot in the nursing home when I need it. And so it's important to ask those hard questions. What are you doing with my money? How do you invest it? Who's on your board, right? What's the fiscal management of this property like? Those are important questions to ask.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I did want to mention, I wish we probably could do 7 different episodes here and talking about how we ended up needing these communities or thinking about these communities. But I will say the book on Being Mortal by Atul Gawande
Mm.
actually goes through that in meticulous detail. And so I plan to do a book club on it in one of these podcasts someday. But
Yeah,
do what?
I want to come. I'll read the
I
book.
know. Yeah, it's such a great book, but it goes to because I mean, we're talking. I know you said this is very new, but we'd have to go way up higher than a 30,000 foot view to say this cultural shift from aging parents living with their children or vice versa, and why that is no longer the case. And that's a very complex socioeconomic discussion, probably beyond the scope of what we can focus on today. But anyway, I just wanted to drop that book in there. One thing that I have found is that a lot of people just off the street don't have a lot of understanding of the cost of these kinds of services. And they say, oh, well, when the time comes, my mom will just enter an assisted living and we'll figure it out. And then when I see them come to that time, they are absolutely stunned and shocked that that's not really affordable. And so what I see set up is like this chasm between if you have with low financial resources, the only substitute for any kind of senior housing is going to be through a Medicaid type system long term. And there's all these other rules with that. So I wanted to just make sure we kind of level set on independent living and assisted living and get a really broad idea of what we're talking about in terms of cost, because I feel like if we step too far into it before people even understand if that's even on the table, and I would imagine for the vast majority of people listening, that's probably not on the table. Although I have seen some group home settings, like you said, that are running maybe 3,000 a month. And if you scrape together enough Social Security and pension payments, like that's doable for some families. But when you get into the 10 to 20,000 a month in some of these cases, like for memory care, that's kind of well outside the reach of most people. So when somebody just doesn't know anything and they ask you about just how this works financially, what do you tell them?
Yeah. So let's start with approximate averages. And again, it's wildly different based on
Right.
where you live.
Amenities and location, right? And all
Mhm.
sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So in assisted living, you're looking around 5,000, but that's going to wildly depend on how much care you need. So for instance, you might move into an assisted living paying $3,000 for your apartment, 4,000, right? And then you need to add care on top of that. And care typically will probably be at least $1,000, but with every level you go up, you're looking at maybe another $750 to $1,000 jump. So you might end up paying 3,000 plus 7,000 in your dying days, right? In that assisted living. So 5,000 ish, but it could be much higher if your care needs are higher or if you're in a particular city that has, already has high housing prices. It's very much dependent. If you're in a city with high housing prices, then your assisted livings are going to reflect those same kind of prices. If it's 30% higher than cities around you, your assisted living will be 30% higher, right? Memory care averages somewhere around $7,500. But again, you easily see that more than that, easily 9, 10 for many people, because with memory care, you're going up pretty quickly in your care needs, especially if there's any kind of agitation, aggression, hitting other people, some sort of yelling behavior or trying to leave the community behavior. Those kind of behaviors take a lot of extra management from the team. And so those prices can get higher relatively quickly. Independent living varies wildly because each independent living is basically just an apartment complex. And so the cost shifts based on how exclusive, how high end that community is versus being just, typical apartment complex, as well as how many amenities do they provide. Do they just provide meals on the weekend? Do they provide meals every single day, 3 times a day, once a day, right? What are you getting for that price? Do they have a pool and workshops and art studios, or is it pretty basic independent living with transportation and housekeeping? But you're going to see at least $1,500 to $6,000 a month based on those kind of factors for independent living. So that's no care at all. That's just the apartment with all kinds of amenities. Now, I have worked with many families, counseling many families through this, and unless their parent rented their last 10 years, never did not own a home, and did not have any assets at all. Like most families can afford at least 1 or 2 years toward the end of life. Other than, of course, that 30% of our population or whatever who's only rented, owns no assets, etc. So there is certainly a segment of the American population that could never afford to live in any assisted living without a family member stepping up to pay. But then there's a good percentage that can afford it for at least a year, if not 2 years. So what I usually do with families is I sit down and say, okay, let's list out how much assets your loved one has access to. They have a house, they have, maybe 50,000 in stocks, they have this, they have this. Let's put that one lump number, okay? And let's do how much do they get every month? Okay, they get this from Social Security, they get this from the teachers union, right? Okay, they got 3,000 a month. Okay, great. If they're a veteran, there's often veterans benefits that maybe brings in an extra 1,000 or something a year we can access. So I say, okay, so maximum they have is at $4,000 a month or $3,000 a month, but it's going to cost you $9,000 a month. So I said, the difference is $5,000. So now let's take that 5,000 and let's divide your assets. So maybe you have 200,000, you have 100,000, divide 100,000 by 5,000. That's the number of months you can afford to live in assisted living. Most families don't think about it that way. They just look at the monthly income and they don't see how to calculate it. But once you see how to calculate it, like, okay, yeah, my mom can do this, right? So for many families, just doing the simple calculation helps them tremendously evaluate then how much they really should afford. If I want this 100,000 to last me 3 years, then I need to find a place that, is this much money, right? So it's very helpful for families to do that.
And what about the role of long-term care insurance if somebody thinks their parent has long-term care insurance? And I have seen such high variability in how that's executed and actually honored or not honored. And so I've seen a lot of patients. I've actually seen it go really well and I've seen it gone really poorly. Can you just comment on and maybe even just the direction that that's going?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have residents who live in our memory cares, and I think our assisted livings who are on long-term care insurance is probably 2 or 3 out of 60 people per building who
Okay.
might have
Okay.
it. So it's not a high percentage. You have to be very careful when you sign up for these programs. Some of them only will pay for nursing homes. Some will only pay for home care. Some will pay X number of dollars a day wherever you are. Some require a doctor to be on site at the place where you go. Like they all have their different stipulations. You really want to buy one that will let you choose to stay at home and pay for a caregiver or go into assisted living. And that gives you basically a chunk of money every month. Like that's the one I would choose if I was buying one. I don't know if I would buy one or not because they are so expensive, I wonder sometimes if could I save that money and invest it just as well?
Sure.
Because if it's
Yeah.
$750 to $1,500 a month, could I invest that money better? I don't know, but it can cost a lot of money. And in some states, like my state, most of the companies left my state because of how the costs of care in my state. It was very hard for a period of time to even find any company offering long-term care insurance. My state, Washington, did pass some legislation to require employees to pay a certain amount of money every month into a state fund. Many of us opposed it just because it was a false sense of security for employees. They're paying $50 a month or whatever, but when they finally need care, they get maximum $50,000 and it's over like a year or two. You can't pay for any long-term care with that. So it's a very false sense of security for employees. So yeah, long-term care insurance is can be great, especially if you have the money to pay for it and you don't need that for other things in your life. Can be absolutely great. I think you can do just as well probably with buying a house, paying that house off, and that house, then you can use that money any way you want. And sometimes there's creative solutions. My aunt, she got a brain tumor, and she was in her last 2 months of life, and she really wanted to be home. And she had very minimal income. So what we did is we worked with a realtor who basically was able to, we signed an agreement that basically gave the house to this realtor into a special LLC with the agreement that as soon as she passed away, the realtor would sell the house and would recoup the costs that she had endured because she uses a hard money lender to bring in some money that paid for all the home care to care for my aunt in her own home for 3 months. It was like $24,000 a month, right? And so the money that would come from the house paid for her care. And when she passed away, the house was sold, all those debts were paid. So she was able to live in her house till her dying day, which was just a wonderful, wonderful thing for our family.
Right. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that because there's always, always a way if there's a lot of creativity usually.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if someone is trying to select a community, especially if they're in an area where there's a lot of options. And some people are in a rural area where there's only one. But what are your tips and tricks for discernment when, if somebody is able to afford it, or even if they have a wider budget range? Like, what's your go to advice for that?
Well, my first advice is really pay attention to what will make your loved one thrive and what will make you thrive as their family member. So, for instance, if you have a tradition of sitting together on the back porch and drinking a beer together almost every night, and that's how you love each other, then you need to pick a place that's 5 minutes away. Even if it's not the best place, the fact that it's 5 minutes away, so you can walk over there, drive over there every night, is really important. Going 45 minutes will completely transform your relationship with your loved one. If your loved one has a real love of walking their dog or just walking outside, and you put them in an assisted living that's in a strip mall and with busy streets all around it, you have now taken away their joy. Their one joy in their life is now gone, right? If your loved one is a big foodie, like they go to great restaurants, are really into food, and you pick a place that this serves biscuits, a meatloaf every day forever and ever and ever and ever, right? Like they may just completely lose interest in eating and in life. If you pick a place that is, the care needs of your loved one are really important. Like they're not, whether they're walking, it's not a big, they're not going to go to bingo. Like their care needs are paramount. And you pick a place that has no nurses or the nurse is like on call, right? Like that's probably a really bad idea because your loved one has wounds, they have sores, they have this issue with, whatever. Like you need a team that is got the chops to work on medical things. So number one, what will help them thrive and what will help you thrive? Think through that. And everywhere you go, ask the question, will the most important things to me be present whether I'm staying at home, because your options are I stay at home and I pay for home care, I move into assisted living, I move into independent living but pay for home care in the independent living, I move into memory care, I do an adult family home, right? Those are kind of your five major options. So in all of those options, you have to ask the same question because one's not better than the other. If mom loves to go to church, be with her friends, have a great time, have people over all the time, but you're making her stay at home and no car, no transportation, you're never able to take her anywhere, and you buy a home care agency that doesn't drive people anywhere, you've devastated what's most important to her just to keep her at home. Whereas if you moved her into assisted living with transportation, that's easy for friends to visit, that's easy for her to go places, and that has a church service on site, right? Like her life is going to be much better. So I'm a big proponent of ask the question, what is her purpose in life? What makes her tick? What makes me tick when I visit with her? Like, do I just not want to see my mom because she was very abusive in my life and I really need a team that will take care of her and not call me every day? Well, then you need to find that kind of place where they have all the resource. They have a salon on site. They've got a massage on site. They've got OTPT. They've got a doctor visits there. If you don't want to be hanging out with your mom, either because you can't or because you don't want to because of conflict, then you need to pick a place that you don't have to be the one to take her to all of her medical appointments. Because trust me, if you don't work with a place like that, they're going to call you every week and be like, your mom needs this. Because they're bound by law to call you and tell you, mom needs her feet done, mom needs dental, mom needs this. And you're going to be like, I've never taken mom to so many appointments in my life, right?
Right.
Does that make sense as a first priority? Do you see
Yes,
that in your own work
absolutely.
of
Yeah,
how?
and I'm glad you mentioned that because I've been very interested and done several interviews on this podcast for that exact situation where we make an assumption, like in the commercials where everybody has this glowing and warm fuzzies towards their parents, and that is not the case for 100% of people, and like you said, I mean, there may be some stress relief to the exposure to somebody if there's a situation where they need more care and there's somebody who could competently give it, thinking of it in those terms. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Exactly. And then, more specifically to your question, I think you need to take on in one sense, you need to take on the perspective like you would buy any large purchase in your life. And you need to look at what am I actually buying? Because typically the senior living industry is selling a feeling, they're selling a sense of security, they're selling a sense of liveliness, they're selling a feeling, right? Because that's what good marketing is. Like if you go to look at Pepsi, right? Pepsi doesn't here's all the benefits of drinking Pepsi. No, you see a sports star drinking Pepsi and then you want to drink it too, right? Exactly the same way with senior living because that's how we market in the United States is you give what people want out of life in your commercials and in your advertising to appeal to your customers. That's what any good advertiser does. But you as the consumer have to put on what am I actually buying? Like when I buy this vacuum, does it do the things I need it to do? And when you go into a community, you need to have those kind of questions. How many caregivers am I purchasing, right? Like, how often do you check on my mom physically? How often will a nurse assess her with her eyes on her, right? How many meals a day am I getting? How many snacks? Do I have access to snacks anytime I want? Can I drink alcohol? That's important to me to drink my liquor. Do you provide liquor? Do I need to buy it? Can I keep it in my room, right? I smoke. Am I purchasing a place where I can smoke and there's a place to smoke that I feel comfortable smoking in? Do I have one day a week of transportation wherever I want to go? Or is it only taking me to Trader Joe's and a bank? And I have to pick that bank now because it's only Wells Fargo, right? Like, or am I purchasing a concierge service where I can go anywhere I want in the city any day I want? Like, you can't just hear, we offer transportation. You need to know exactly how much transportation you're paying for with that $5,000, $7,000, right? You need to know what are you paying for as far as housekeeping, maintenance, meals, activity programs, and care. What care is included? What kind of care can I not receive here? What are the things that will happen that you will say you need to leave? Right? Or you will say you need to purchase a one-on-one caregiver to be with you, even though we're providing care, etc. What are the scenarios where we're going to say you need to leave unless you provide and pay for out of your own expense a one-on-one caregiver to be with your mother because her needs are so high it can no longer be met here. You need to know those things when you go in. Every community is totally different. So in one sense, ask the same questions you would ask from a purchase perspective. On the flip side, even though we would like to believe that these senior living communities in America are like a Starbucks where you can just go in and buy a product, they really are like little cities. They really are like little churches. You don't buy something when you go to church, right? It's like you're participating in a community. And so, and many, busy professionals don't like that idea. They want to buy care for mom. They don't want to enter into some sort of living community and become a new member of that community. And yet, to be honest with you, that's probably the most successful way to approach senior living is to recognize, yes, I'm going to be paying rent. Yes, they're going to raise my rent every year. Yes, they're going to want more money from me every time my mom's care decreases. But other than that, I am participating in a whole new community. That's like paying taxes in my city, right? To live in the city, you got to pay the taxes. But you're only successful in your city as much as you put into it. If you're, giving cards to the caregivers saying thank you, and you're coming to some of the activities, and you're bringing, some prizes to bingo, and you're walking the halls and saying hello to the different people, and you're bringing your mom to the dining room and introducing her to people. Like, if you become a part of the community, your mom's life will thrive there more than if you see it as a purchase.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I had a couple other things that occurred to me. One, and I did a podcast on this a long time ago, which was the anticipated lifespan is increasing. And so we're looking at people in my children's and your children's generation living 120, 130 years. And so that kind of flips what we're thinking in terms of mom till she's 80, 85, maybe 90 if we're lucky. And really, we don't have to tackle this today, but there's a more global issue that's happening as we're extending life and we're not extending housing and programming and support as much as fast as the lifespan is expanding. And so I'm pretty comfortable thinking for my parents who are in their 70s that I have a pretty good idea. But for my own children or my grandchildren someday, I mean, that challenge is completely different, which is again, looking at 120, 130 years, which is, I know sounds crazy right now, but with the way things are going and the advancements and getting things treated earlier and cancers identified earlier and God willing, some sort of management of the dementia type afflictions, like that's realistic. In your industry, has that come up or how do you guys conceptualize the changing lifespan?
So, as an industry, I don't think our industry is too forward thinking in that regard. I think in general they're looking maybe 10 years out as an industry, probably. I'm sure there's definitely some folks who are like leaning into, biohacking and trying to build programs in their senior living to deal with biohacking and stuff like that. As a gerontologist, right, I think that the key is to keep people as healthy and able-bodied as possible as long as possible, because it just isn't sustainable to pay for people to care for you for 20, 30 years, right? Paying for people to care for us. There's not enough people that even want to do that, right? We don't even have enough people who want that as a career, let alone can we pay a price point that we can afford to pay for people to care for us, right? And
Right.
so there is the greater need for the generation that you and I are in to really take seriously our health, our fitness, our functionality, our gut health, our what we're eating, what we're drinking, the toxins we're exposing ourselves to. It's being very focused on building friendships because all the research shows, that friendship is the biggest determinant of you not getting dementia. It may not be the reason you don't get dementia, but it's one of the biggest factors in people who have tons of friends, that close relationships, intimate relationships that are healthy. They are like 50% less likely to have dementia. So there's no drug, no exercise that is showing any promise like that from my knowledge, except for dance. I think dance is a very high percentage of people who dance socially. But again, that's social. It's a social experience.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's the key. I think our industry has an opportunity to be part of that, in that the more our industry creates settings where it's easier to take care of yourself, then the more likely it is that people will move in younger, take advantage of all the fitness classes, the great Mediterranean diet, the socialization, the learning, the new skills that you can access in, let's say, an independent living community, and maybe stave off some of the functional decline because you're not alone in the suburbs trying to pull all this healthy living off by yourself.
Right. And I would credit the senior living industry of maybe uplifting some of the standards we've had even in nursing facilities, because there is a Venn diagram of a population who could go either way. I know there are definitions, but there's some that are kind of on the bubble of whether they would be in an assisted living or in a skilled nursing facility. And so I see that kind of cohesion there of, they have to be competitive too. And back to talking about the costs for nursing facilities are not dissimilar for usually much smaller spaces. And so I'm very familiar with this part of the industry, and you're looking at, for basically a dorm room, around 7,000 a month if you want
Yeah.
the room to yourself, and maybe 3,000 to 4,000 a month if you want to split it with a roommate. And so if you're not going to be able to afford that, really, if you can't support your needs in your own home, then for that population, and I know people go through this all the time, like it can't be true. It's absolutely true. You have to spend through your assets
Mm.
and then hope you live in a state with decent Medicaid services, and then get into a nursing facility. And Medicaid, for I believe most states, I don't know if it's every state, but I know here in Texas, mandates that if you're Medicaid funded, that you live in a double room.
Wow.
You have to live in there isn't like, well, I'll put mom in a Medicaid nursing room, but I'll pay 500 more a month for them to. Well, that's not how it works. Because if you have the resources to pay that extra money, then the state's going to say, well, then clearly you don't qualify for Medicaid. Medicaid is intended for patients that,
Yeah.
or state residents that are indigent, that don't have any other resources. And so you can have, now it varies by state, right? So your homestead is protected, at least in Texas, but if you have vehicles or other assets, and again, varies by state, even your retirement accounts will count against you, and you have to spend through them before you qualify. And it's like a donut. Like, either you have enough money through your savings and pension and retirement or support to go into these facilities that we're talking about, or your Medicaid, and that in between, it's like it's a fork in the road. There isn't anything that I can think of, unless you got really lucky with a group home in your community that is charging maybe around 4,000 a month. But again, 4,000 a month isn't chump change. It's not like,
Mm.
you're, even if you're helping a parent, I mean, it's a indefinite expense. That's the other thing. When you're talking about housing, you're not talking about, oh, well, they'll use this to get through their knee replacement. I mean, this is housing. This is where they go live, and they take their things and they stay there. And so, again, not knowing how long somebody's going to live, I mean, that commitment could be a year, it could be 20 years, right? And so that uncertainty is what I think also brings a lot of attention to this decision, and even to that relationship or the transaction, because the nature of it is just highly uncertain, right? Highly uncertain when somebody would move from independent living to assisted living. And as you mentioned, as you progress through those stages, the costs change. And so whatever the budget is, it's like, well, I could guess if it takes, 3 years here, 3 years there, but it can be really challenging. So,
Absolutely. And I think it's important for families to divide their attention between care and housing, because especially if you're in that middle market that you really can't afford most options in your city, but you also have enough resources that you can't get Medicaid, you really got to ask the question, why are we looking at housing at all? Right? Because there's care can be delivered anywhere. You could literally be in a tent on the side of the road and could still have a caregiver helping you, right? And so you can be thinking through all different options for where could mom live and what does mom actually need. I counseled a family that was planning on going to assisted living. Mom had very little, but I said, why is she going? Why are you putting her in assisted living? Like, why not an apartment? And then just order meals through Blue Door. It sounds like all you really want for her right now is meals and visits to the doctor. Like, if you can do the doctor run, and if you can't, there's lots of services that'll do it for you, and it's like $50, right? So you pay for a doctor run and you pay for meal delivery, and she gets an apartment for $1,200. It's a lot cheaper than going right into assisted living because, she's at that age, we should do it, right? So families that are in that position, I think, need to ask that question seriously. Is like, what can I do for care? Because there's often also state programs or county programs that provide so many hours of caregiving. So for instance, you decide, okay, mom can't live with me because we argue too much. So I'm going to have her live in an apartment. We're going to get a roommate using Nesterly. And so there'll be a roommate who's real good, who's going to take care of the trash and do the dishes. And then we're just going to pay for 4 hours a day of caregiving, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, right? The rest of the day, she's fine. She sits, she watches TV, reads a book, takes a nap. She just needs help getting up, getting dressed, getting a bath, and then getting wound down and doing her meds at night, right? So now we're looking 2 hours a day, 7 days a week, let's say $30 an hour. So 60, so that's 120 a day, right? 120 a day. And let's say your county pays for 3 days a week of 2 hours a day or whatever. Right now you delete that cost because your county is willing to pay for that or provide those caregivers. And then you start to cobble together a system. Now it's not as convenient as people who are wealthy who can just pay for a system that does everything for you. It takes a little more energy on our part to coordinate that. But sometimes that is the better option than, okay, she's going to have to live at home. We're going to argue all the time and I have to do all the care. Like, no, no, there's other
Right.
options. The
Right.
other thing with Medicaid, I think families need to hear loud and clear is there's a good chance that there are no Medicaid beds within an hour of where you live. That has happened again and again and again. In my own life, a really good friend of mine, Medicaid would only pay for a bed 45 minutes to an hour away from me. So now I, the caregiver, had to drive an hour to an hour and a half and then round trip, right? To be able to take him to the doctors, be able to do things for him, take him to his church. It was a huge burden on me as his friend. And families don't think about it. They think, oh, Medicaid may not be the best. Medicaid might be, less. A lot of those buildings are not run very well. They don't have great amenities. They sometimes smell. That's fine. But you might be driving an hour every time there's an emergency. So just be prepared for that. So don't look at it as an easy button. Don't look at it as an easy button when we'll just spend on mom's assets. Like maybe use mom's assets first to put her somewhere that's
Right.
good.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't want the state authorities at my door. The other thing I keep forgetting to mention because I assume this, is Medicaid is not a housing program, it's a medical program.
That's right.
And
That's
you
right.
have to have a medical diagnosis. It can't be that I'm old and I can't live with my daughter anymore. That's not a medical diagnosis. It has to be something that requires medical supervision. And
Right.
so if somebody is otherwise healthy, but has maybe a mobility challenge or something, that is not going to meet their fairly strict criteria, that's not an option that you would keep in the back of your head just when, like you said, like pushing the button, like, oh, we'll just go qualify for Medicaid. That is medical dollars that are being put under a housing umbrella. And it's medical money that's funded through medical grants for people with medical conditions. And so you really can end up, if you have somebody who is not qualifying, even that is not really, like a reasonable option. So,
Exactly. I think families just need to take Medicaid off the table pretty much and pretend that either I'm going to be paying for it myself or my mom and dad are, whoever it is, sister, aunt. Like that's what's going to happen. And so plan for that eventuality, put things in place for that, because if it doesn't happen and everything falls apart, maybe Medicaid will be there. Maybe, you know,
right.
you have to plan otherwise.
So planning for that eventuality, I just want to brainstorm with you. So you're talking, it's not just the financial planning, right? Which would be like you mentioned, the physical capabilities and mobility. So if, like, to me, long-term care insurance is, can you walk half a mile? Can you go up 2 flights of stairs? Like, and preserving that function to the extent possible, because that's what's keeping you in your home, right? And so if that's in, like, I have a friend of mine who pays out of pocket for a physical therapist to come visit her parents once a week. And I mean, well, I don't know, maybe it costs $75 or something like that. But what that is somebody is
Mhm.
doing a custom assessment and saying, here's what we're going to work on this week, and it's preservation of function. And so maybe thinking of it more globally, like, can we try to keep the medical and care needs down so that will extend the amount of time, that you could live independently. So
Yeah, that's an excellent example. Anything we can invest now in our parents that helps them live a healthier life and maintain their ability to take care of themselves is probably pennies on the $100, right? As far as
right,
how we're saving long term. And then second would be proximity. So anytime you can arrange for that elder to be closer to someone who's invested in their care, the better. So if there's any transitions, any moves, any opportunities to talk them into moving or moving them where they're closer, they're in walking distance of your house, right? That's going to be a huge piece of decision making because typically it's not just mom needs care, it's that I'm not there to do it. But if I am literally living a few doors down, then the care that I need to purchase is much less because I'm able to bring some extra soup over. Like, it doesn't take anything for me to make a little extra soup, one extra chicken breast, right? And so I'm able to help feed mom fairly easily. I'm able to take her places very easily. It's not a half hour drive, calling another city, right? There's a tremendous things that happen. We've moved right next to grandma. And, we've lived together about, 7 years now? She's, 3 doors down. She's totally independent. But when she needs care, we as a family are going to have so much easier than all of our friends who are caring for loved ones who are cities away, states away.
Right.
It's going to be much harder. So that may not be possible for everybody, but anytime you can think through proximity and you can arrange proximity to one sibling who's willing and eager to participate in their care, you reduce the cost of care significantly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I know I could probably talk to you for hours and hours about this, and I've already kept you longer than I had anticipated, but I think you have a lot to share. So, in general, if somebody wanted to, I know you work in communities across the country, right? So, if somebody wanted to learn more about you or the companies that you work with or represent, how would they find that out?
One way would be to go to my LinkedIn profile. It's just my name. If you see my name on the podcast, Benjamin Surmi, you just go to LinkedIn, put that in. I'll pop right up. And articles I've written, podcasts I've been on, you can start there, and you can contact me through LinkedIn. You can also go to the company's website, which will be on my LinkedIn. It's kelschcommunities.com, and to contact me there. Would love to be helpful to anyone who needs some advice.
So, your resources, you mentioned you've done podcasts, and then I'm sure on that website there's other resources on there.
Yeah, newspaper articles, things like that. We've talked about different subjects. And I
Yeah.
speak at conferences as well across the country. So if anybody's doing a church church group is doing a conference on aging or something, I'm always happy to help out in those kind of situations.
Awesome. Well, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us today. I think this was very interesting and helpful for our audience and very on point for some of the questions I've already gotten from them. So I appreciate your time and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rebecca, so much.
Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes three, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, you should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.